All right, here we go. Welcome to Chris HOJ-Cast number 12. Great to be back. And I don't have a cadence set up for when I'm going to release these episodes. And the truth is that I probably never will, just because I don't really work that way. I more so push record when inspiration strikes. So even back in the House of Jordans days, I mean, you could roughly expect one House of Jordans episode per month, but it was never on a specific day, the third Wednesday of the month or something like that. It never worked like that. It was more just over the course of a month. I would keep a running Apple Notes file open and jot down ideas. And then eventually, when there was enough ideas to fill a few hour long episode, I'd get on the horn with Christina and Brian and say, hey, want to get together and record this? And then we'd find a time and we'd sit down and we'd do it. And this is going to be the same way, except these aren't going to be multi-hour episodes, but I just kind of wait for a critical mass to build. And I was working on a different episode that was going to be the content of episode 12. And I have like all these different things, different projects going on at the same time: card ladder related work, collection work, research work, just all different types of things. And sort of, sometimes inspiration strikes on one idea and I'll start crafting a HOJ-Cast episode around that idea. And then all of a sudden it'll occur to me that, this idea hasn't fully developed yet. I need to take this back to the lab and work on it a little more. And so that's what happened. So the content for what was going to be 12 has been put on the back burner for a bit, but eventually we'll make an episode. And the content for this episode now actually is completely constructed around two different occurrences. The first one is a really big mail day for my collection from last week. And then the second one is it relates to the conclusion of the 2024-25 NBA season. So that's a preview of what today's episode is going to be about. The first part of this episode is going to be talking about my Christian McCaffrey collection, and in particular, the card that I added to it that provoked this episode. And then the other half, the back half of this episode, is going to be talking about where NBA legacies stand after the conclusion of the 2024-25 season, and in particular through the lens of the total MVPs metric that I've devised, and also the total MVPs metric, which I debuted with Cajun a little while ago, and I'll talk more about kind of how that came to be and everything, hopefully, if I remember to. But yeah, we'll see how many brain cells are still functioning, how many neural pathways are still lighting up by the time we get that deep into the episode. So let's start first with the Christian McCaffrey stuff. So Christian McCaffrey here. Okay, so see, I left a quote on the screen that's a preview of something that's coming later. So you probably saw that and say, what is that talking about? So just ignore that. This is the cover photo for the slides following on Christian McCaffrey. So I'm going to start, since I'm in the podcast format, I've never really went into why Christian McCaffrey or how that came to be. Let me just start very briefly with that. So around 2020 and 2021, somewhere in that range, Josh and I were developing ideas. And it's funny, if you kind of listen back to the crossover, you can hear us develop ideas week to week. And it's not perfectly linear. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I've taken a lot of heat for saying linear, when in fact it is linear, 3 syllables. The development of those ideas is not linear per se, but it does somehow follow an arc over time. And I think one of the ideas that Josh and I were punting back and forth and then just sort of landed on, and I think he was well ahead of this, and I sort of was the turtle here in the race of the tortoise and the hare. He was just way out in front, but I sort of slowly inched my way and caught up eventually, which was this idea of pivoting into really fun athletes to collect great cards of that are not bubbling, peaking, or just for whatever reason are not cost prohibitive. And where Josh landed, and Josh had been landing here for years, and it was really a perfect landing place for him because of his passion for fantasy football, his passion for collecting, his passion, all those passions sort of combined for him to land on, collecting players in the skills positions. So it's no secret that quarterbacks are extremely expensive to collect. But the same isn't necessarily true for some of the greatest skills position players, especially some of the greatest skills position players from this current era, this golden fantasy football era, this golden era of ratings for the NFL, this cultural imprint moment that the NFL has been having here recently. And so he was already sort of, testing the waters by building like a Julio Jones collection and a Michael Thomas collection, Todd Gurley collection, stuff like that. And then I sort of came along and, as we were doing the crossover and we were talking and thinking about things, we sort of would go back and forth about this idea that, man, Michael Jordan collecting is just so expensive now. And LeBron James collecting is really, it's really difficult to swim in those waters now. It's just too competitive, too many well-capitalized participants, too many dealers and flippers and investors involved. It's just such a competitive environment and so many layers of value and premiums baked into these prices that one wrong move can really be damaging. And I did make a wrong move. I'm sure people don't need to hear me tell this story for the umpteenth time, but I still couldn't resist buying some Michael Jordan cards during that period. And one of them that I bought was really, I think I hold the all-time high price for that card in that grade, which was the Row 1 Legacy Collection from 1997-98, which I still think is a phenomenal card. But I've since sold it and locked in my loss, pivoting into other cards. And on the Michael Jordan front, without teasing too much of a future HOJ-Cast episode, the episode that I was preparing did deal with Michael Jordan cards. So I'm really excited to sort of get back to that episode once I'm ready to. But anyway, so I was sort of trying to get on Josh's level, and I was sort of trying to get to the point where I could find a skills position player in football that really excited me to collect, and I could get great cards of this player, and I wouldn't spend my whole annual card budget on just one card, which was pretty much becoming the case with Jordan. It was becoming the case with Luka. And so, I started branching out. Those are the first two PC players that Christina and I focused on. And then we started branching out. Christina branched out into Maxi Kleber, sort of taking, the end of bench PC approach. I mean, Kleber certainly is an end of bench. He's a valuable rotation player in several Mavericks deep playoff runs. And I think he can still be valuable to the Lakers too. And he's a really interesting player to collect because he's from Germany, and there are German collectors who like to focus on players from Germany. So gives him a little bit more of a robust collector base than if he weren't from Germany, frankly. But Christina made that pivot. I made the pivot into Christian McCaffrey, and I made the pivot into Nikola Jokic. And anyway, those pivots started as like really modest endeavors, but all of a sudden, the fire in me suddenly wants to investigate how I can get the best cards of these players, and all of a sudden it starts becoming a lot more expensive than originally anticipated. And then you have to make some difficult decisions, like how have I gone too far down this rabbit hole of a quote unquote side PC, and really at this point maybe I need to back up and take stock of everything I've accumulated for this player and see if maybe I need to trade it in to get back to a collection of the main PC player. And the trade-off there is always comparing whether it's better to have a good card of a great player in hobby terms, a good hobby card in the eyes of the hobby of a player that the hobby considers to be a Mount Rushmore type player, or is it better to have a great card of a good player? And the good player typically is something that I have more of a sentimental attachment to or a preference for than most others do. So and that's another topic that the crossover has kicked around for years. But so anyway, over the course of the crossover, I've decided to sort of make this pivot, and McCaffrey was my entry into football cards, which then has blossomed into this whole other thing where now now I'm a Mahomes collector, which probably wouldn't have happened without the McCaffrey for it. But here I am. So McCaffrey was the pivot. The time span is 2020, 2021. And I start dipping a toe into this. I come up with a Prizm Gold rookie year card of his pretty quickly. It was still pretty expensive. I think it ran a few grand or somewhere in that ballpark. But McCaffrey's, he's not a scrub. He's certainly not a star quarterback or anything like that. He's certainly not even the greatest at his position. That would be guys like Jim Brown and Walter Payton and guys who've won MVPs from that position, Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith. I think all those guys are certainly ranked ahead of McCaffrey in terms of the general consensus opinion about a running back. But he's no scrub either. And I'm going to explain some of his better points here that you may or may not know about in a second. That sort of gets me excited about collecting him. So the pivot to McCaffrey was equal parts nostalgia and sentimentality, and analysis of where he stands historically as a football player, and the fun of being able to collect an active football player. And granted, all of this decision making was happening before he was traded to San Francisco. But I have a sentimental connection to him because he was on one of my fantasy football teams that won a championship, and he was overwhelmingly the reason why. So that's part of it. And then and also just not just the fact that he's on my team, but also just that year after year, he's the consensus number one pick, year after year. And I started playing fantasy football in the mid 2010s, much later than most people. And it was through a family league, but the contestants in that league are very sharper than me, especially with fantasy stuff. And I just noticed that he's always at the top every year, and it feels like this. I don't want to overstate the point, but it was like Jordan in the 90s, just in the sense that this guy wins every year. McCaffrey's picked first every year. Like after a half decade of just watching this guy constantly be the top fantasy pick and the number one projected player in fantasy drafts, it just sort of, you wake up one day and you say, wow, like this guy's awesome. So there's that. And then there was the objective component, which is I like, this is very reductive, but for a PC player, I like a PC player to be the top of a list. It doesn't need to be the top of every list, doesn't need to be the top of most lists, but I like them to be at the top of a list, and a list that I can go look at and say, yeah, that's really cool. This guy's, at the top of a meaningful list to me. And McCaffrey checked that box too, as we're about to see in a minute. So let me get into that, more the objective side of McCaffrey. So I've pulled up his Wikipedia career highlights and awards. And like I said, some of the stuff comes after the decision to collect them. So he did win an NFL Offensive Player of the Year award, which is awesome. I think the skills position players, a pretty good litmus test for myself, if I were going to venture into collecting another skills position player, whether offensive or defensive, would be, do they have an OPOY or a DPOY? That's to me, the MVP of the non-quarterbacks. And I saw an interesting tweet today that sort of pointed out that the sheer number of players in the NFL who are actively rostered dwarfs the NBA and the MLB. The MLB gives out 2 MVPs per year. The NBA gives out 1, and the NFL gives out 1. And this person was saying, should the NFL start giving out 2? And it was thought-provoking. But then I sort of thought to myself, well, they sort of give out 3. They give out the general MVP, they give out the offensive player of the year, and the defensive player of the year. So maybe it all sort of works itself out anyway. But he's got that OPOY, really enjoy that. He's got 3 first-team All-Pros. And you can see the 2 seasons are listed, even though it says he has 3 first-team All-Pros, 2019 and 2023. And the reason for that is because he was selected to 2 different positions, All-Pro in 2019, the running back position first team and the flex position first team. And then also he made it at running back in 2023. And then he has a second-team All-Pro too, 3 Pro Bowls, and he once led the NFL in rushing yards. So that's the Wikipedia snapshot. I also like first-team All-Pros as a collecting or a collectability proxy. So there are great players who, for whatever reason, bad timing or narrative, never won an OPOY or a DPOY or an MVP, even though they probably should have. And so first team is a different way to sort of get at that. Like Tyreek Hill is a guy who I think has half a dozen or maybe 5 or somewhere around there first teams. And that's certainly right on par with, I think, an OPOY having that many first teams. It's just very difficult to get a first team in the NFL, and we all know NFL stands for not for long in terms of career lengths. So to have half a decade's worth of first teams is, I mean, it's extremely impressive and rare. That'd be a cool list to make. Who has the most first team all pros? Okay, so then here's the list that McCaffrey sits atop. That probably is my favorite go-to stat for him. So you might, if you can see this list on your screen, if you're consuming this on YouTube, you'd say, well, Josh Allen is at the top of this list. McCaffrey is not at the top of this list. So first of all, the list that I'm showing is PPR, points per reception, fantasy points per game, career. And Josh Allen has the most all time, 22.9 fantasy PPR fantasy points per game. Patrick Mahomes is second, 22.3, and then McCaffrey is third, 22.09. So among all players in the history of the NFL, including quarterbacks, McCaffrey is third. He is not first on this list. If you narrow the list to only skills position players or non-quarterbacks, he would be first, obviously. And that sort of relates back to the McCaffrey's tendency to be atop of fantasy drafts, is because the value of putting up 22 PPR points per game in a fantasy league from the running back position is much more valuable than doing it from the quarterback position, because there are many more quarterbacks who can get closer to that number than there are running backs who can in a given season. So that's what makes his draft value so high, even though historically there's been 2 quarterbacks over their careers who have put up a bit more PPR points per game than he has. So he is the highest among the non-quarterbacks. But even when you include the quarterbacks, he's still third. And listen to the quarterbacks that he's ahead of. Jaden Daniels, 21.4, who's fourth. Lamar Jackson, 21.2. How many people, if you just sort of stop them and ask them on the street, assuming they play fantasy football, would realize that Christian McCaffrey gets more PPR points per game over his career than Lamar Jackson does? I mean, that's an unexpected stat. Andrew Luck shows up here in 6th, 20.5 PPR per game. Deshaun Watson, 7th, 20.3. I suspect that average will come down a bit if he plays this year at all, like he did last year, which is something to consider too. I mean, you're surely noticing that outside of it, Andrew Luck is the highest rated retired player on this list, partially because he retired before his twilight seasons. And when players do have their twilight seasons, if they do have them, this drags down career averages. That's something that plagues career average metrics across the board in all sports, especially when they're done on a per game basis. But so you have Luck and then Watson, and then in 8th you have LT, LaDainian Tomlinson, a guy who did have a few twilight seasons, so to speak. Tomlinson is there in 8th at 20.3. So he's the nearest competitor to McCaffrey in terms of PPR points per game among non-QBs. Then you get Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers. Then you get to Marshall Faulk. They're in 13th with 19.9. So there's your top 3 non-QB PPR per game fantasy guys: McCaffrey, LT, and Faulk. I think that's a great list. I think there is a risk that McCaffrey could fall behind one or both of those guys, depending upon how the back half of his career goes, which we're certainly entering into now. So we'll see. We'll see where he ends up. But that's a list that I love. And then here's another list that I love: scrimmage yards per game. So in NFL history, scrimmage yards per game, the highest ranking of all time is the GOAT, Jim Brown, 125 per game. Billy Sims, 119 scrimmage yards per game. Barry Sanders, another GOAT tier running back, 118 yards per game. And then you got C-Mac there in 4th, 114 scrimmage yards per game. And a couple of names below him, Terrell Davis, Walter Payton, Arian Foster, Marshall Faulk, LT, and Saquon Barkley. That rounds out the top 10. So again, beautiful list. Love to see McCaffrey there. Love that I can just go to Football Reference or StatMuse and just see McCaffrey sitting atop some very, very cool lists. Last statistical dive I'll do on McCaffrey, and one of the things that impacted my decision to collect him was actually his 2019 season. So in that 2019 season, McCaffrey had 403 touches. And remember, McCaffrey's a dual threat. So he had 287 rush attempts and 116 receptions, which is phenomenal for a guy from the running back position. He had over 1,000 receiving yards and over 1,000 rushing yards. I think it was one of maybe 3 seasons to have that occur. So he had 403 total touches, which led the NFL. He had 2,392 yards from scrimmage, which led the NFL. And he had 19 total touchdowns, receiving and rushing combined, which also led the NFL. And then in terms of turnovers, he had only 1 fumble that entire season, and it was not lost. It was recovered. Michael Thomas ended up winning Offensive Player of the Year that year because he set the NFL record for most receptions. But clearly McCaffrey had a very, very strong case to be Offensive Player of the Year that year. And then the other season, all-time season McCaffrey had was 2023, where he led the NFL in rushing yards at 1,459. He led the NFL in touches again with 339. And he led the NFL in yards from scrimmage with 2,023. And he led the NFL in total touchdowns, receiving and rushing touchdowns with 21. And he did get rewarded with the Offensive Player of the Year, and he finished, I think, 3rd in MVP voting that year too. So really fun seasons. Okay. With that little preamble about McCaffrey and stuff out of the way, let me talk now about the cards. So the card that I ended up picking up will be the 8th card that I show, but I'm going to make you suffer through 7 cards first, and then you'll see why eventually if you don't already know. So the first card that I'm showing is the 2017, which is associated with McCaffrey's NFL rookie season, the 2017 Prizm Black Finite. And I've got a scan of it on the screen, and then I'm also showing it to the camera here as I have it in hand, so you can kind of see how the surface reflects light. I was going to get into a little bit of the background of how each card got picked up. So at some point earlier in the McCaffrey collecting saga, maybe must have been 2021, I decided that it would be my goal of McCaffrey collecting essentially would be to get this card, this rookie year Prizm Black Finite 1 of 1, and it had never appeared for sale. At least I couldn't find any record of it appearing for sale. And it had never appeared for sale, and it was currently not for sale. I couldn't find it on any collector pages. I couldn't find it in any marketplaces. I couldn't find a record of it having sold. There was a blowout forum post that had documented it maybe being pulled or being graded, and I could see in the pop report that it had been graded and that it did exist. And you can just imagine the tease that is, the allure, knowing that this card is out there, knowing that it's in a gem mint slab, knowing that I can't get to it no matter how hard I try, led me to take some drastic measures, or at least they were drastic at the time. So I started issuing bounties. And bounties is a really interesting topic because sometimes bounties are used to artificially drum up interest in a new product. Sort of like, well, this big new product is dropping, and this is the big new rookie from this product. So, sometimes retail outfits or people who stand to benefit from the product selling well will offer a bounty to buy the best card or one of the best cards from one of the big prospects or one of the big players in that product to drive sales for that product. And that kind of gives bounties a bit of a dirty name, because the idea there is not that the entity offering that bounty truly treasures the opportunity to own that card. The idea is that the bounty is driving sales, and that they will presumably make good on the bounty offer, but they're making the bounty not because of some impulses originating from a collecting passion, but instead it's a business motive. It's a marketing expense in a certain sense. And not that there's anything wrong about business or marketing and so on and so forth. It's just that it's in the context of collecting. If we all put our collector hats on for a second, it's just a little bit impure. It's really not, the heart of collecting is really not oriented around trying to sell product. That's business, which is fine. Again, I'm not trying to condemn business whatsoever. But the heart of collecting is more so the thrill of finding our grails, to put it as simply as possible. And so it's just really not relatable to a collector when a bounty emerges that is issued from a company that really isn't about collecting at all. It's just about, well, we're going to pay a big sum to encourage people to buy this product and hope that they get this card out of the product. And in fact, it can be frustrating for a collector, because if you are a collector who's hoping to buy some of that product to hit a card, potentially to chase a card that you want to add to your collection, or if you want to go after that ultimate chase card that the bounty has been issued for, in either event, the cost of the product is being driven up by this bounty, making it more difficult for you to get that card, making it probably more expensive to obtain those cards in the secondary market. And if you have to compete against that bounty for the ultimate chase card, it can be very difficult for a collector on a collector's budget to compete against a company with a massive marketing budget. So, but patience usually pays off in those situations, because eventually, new products come out, the bounty expires if it doesn't get redeemed, or even if it does get redeemed at some point, hopefully, because the company isn't really trying to collect that card, hopefully they end up offloading it and you'll get another chance at it in auction. But it really can still distort the market in ways that that leave a more or less permanent mark, because once comps get recorded, they tend to be somewhat sticky. But certainly we can find lots of examples where comps aren't sticky and stuff goes down. But they still have some level of an anchoring effect. But anyway, I issued a bounty, and as a collector, not as somebody trying to sell a product. And the bounty was in the amount of $30,000, which, especially at that time for a running back, no matter what the card was, but for a running back, that was a really high bounty. And I have no doubt that it resulted in plenty of Snickers, and I'm not talking about the candy bar, across the collector community. But and it also probably was annoying to some people too, just because it sort of is. It could have an anchoring effect on comparable players as well. Like, well, if this lunatic is offering this much for Christian McCaffrey, that might make it harder for me to get Alvin Kamara or Saquon Barkley or whoever the player that the comparable skills position player is. But anyway, I did it, and I do feel bad if it made it harder for other people to collect things. But I had reached a desperation point, and my collecting ambitions run really high. So I really wanted to pry this card out. I tried lots of different avenues to find it, and it just couldn't be found. And so I put out this bounty, and bounty lingered and lingered and lingered for months and months and months. I think it might have even lingered for a year or more. And I would mention it on content appearances and on the crossover and stuff. And then one day, I guess that day was in sometime in 22, maybe around the late summer of 2022. The card appears is in an Instagram reel by a card shop up in the Pacific Northwest. If I remember correctly, it was in Washington, maybe even in the Seattle area. And this card shop is showing inventory, and it just, it was just a guy rifling through a pile of cards that are now for sale in the card shop's display case. And one of the cards was this one. One of the cards was this McCaffrey 2017. And he just sort of flips through the cards. That's one of them, and then on to the next. And a few people sent it to me, and somebody reached out and said, "Hey, is that bounty still good?" And I was like, "Yeah, it is." And they said, well, I can go pick up this card right now. I live nearby. I can get up to this shop. I can go get it right now if you'll honor that bounty. And I said, of course I will. And so given that this collector in particular, I had met them previously at trade nights back when Christina and I still lived in Southern California. We would go to trade nights at Bullpen LA, and so we had interacted with each other before. And this person also just had proximity to the shop, and I really didn't want to take a risk of just anybody coming in and grabbing it before I could. So I said, please do it. And then knowing that there was an industry event coming up that fall, I can't remember if it was the Mint or I think it must have been the Industry Summit, given that I have a purchase date here in my records of September 30th, 2022. But anyway, both those events were in Vegas. And so since I knew that we would be going to Vegas, I said, hey, how about we show up a day earlier and we drive from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, and we'll pop into the card shop, the Bullpen LA, and we'll say hello, and then we'll do a deal, and I'll pick up the card there. And so Christina and I and my brother went with. My brother did a bit of filming of the deal. Because you never know. I mean, it's kind of cool footage about the McCaffrey collection. He's actually accumulated quite a bit of footage of McCaffrey collecting activities over the years. But we all went and did the swap, and as being the broker and the middleman, he was handsomely rewarded for that. And so he certainly didn't try to gouge or anything. He negotiated a price with the shop, and then and it was below the bounty. If memory, my memory might be a little bit off on some of the details here, but that's how I recall it happening. And then I said, but I'm going to pay the full bounty and you keep the rest as a token of my appreciation. So it was quite the hunt. There's a really memorable comment when I posted that card to my Instagram from Black Griffin Cards, who said, the end of an era. He put that comment, the end of an era. And it really did feel that way at the time, like the era being the hunt for this card, and that this card finally being acquired. And it's sort of like around, by the time I got this card, I think I had 2 of McCaffrey's Black Finites. And since it was in 2022, he didn't have as many as he has today. I guess he probably had 5 Prizm Black Finites in circulation at that time. And I think this one gave me 3 of the 5. So it became a goal to maybe see if I could get all of them. And so that brings me to the second Black Finite of Christian McCaffrey, the 2018 Prizm Black Finite, which I'm also showing to the camera here, as well as have a scan of it on screen. And the 2018, the story there is this. I remember negotiating with this person over email. And I see I have a date purchased here of September 2021. And I paid strong for this at the time. You have to remember, 2021 was a higher market for at least for like active, like it's a bit silly or ironic or foolish even that sort of I've made this pivot to avoid overpaying on, or to avoid, stretching my budget beyond where it should have been stretched. I pivoted into a player like McCaffrey, but it turns out that his cards were quite overpriced probably at the time too. And so at that time, I paid, my records say, $3,700 for this 2018 Prizm Black Finite McCaffrey. And it's the second year, it's a special one, but that was a strong pay. And I don't know what it's worth today. Maybe it's worth a ballpark. Maybe it's probably worth a bit less than that, but not. I don't know. Who knows? But I remember getting connected to this person, I think through a Facebook group. I think they had posted maybe the whole rainbow, the whole McCaffrey 2018 Prizm rainbow. You come across that a lot when you're chasing specific rare football cards. Is that a lot of times they're in the collection of somebody who's built out a rainbow, and so then you have to break up the rainbow. And I did break up that rainbow, and I paid strong for the opportunity to break it up. But so I guess that was like I said, that was in September 2021. So I had that before I had the rookie. All right, and then the next one, the third Prizm Black Finite is the 2019. I happen to really like the design of this one. In football in particular, and maybe particularly because McCaffrey has a black jersey. In a lot of these finites, he ends up having a black Panthers uniform. He has one in the rookie year too, so I guess you could call both of those a jersey color match. But I really happen to like the way that this one looks in football with the black finite pattern. And the story here behind the 2019 is that I purchased this raw from a fellow collector on Instagram, and they really cut me a break. This was purchased in August of 2021 for $1,200. So probably doing okay on this one from the perspective of the market today. And I probably felt like I got a pretty good price on that. Maybe that because I see I purchased this a month before I got the 2018, so maybe that encouraged me, give me a little extra confidence to overpay for the 2018 a bit. And yeah, that was just a collector to collector deal. And then I ended up grading it at a card show, I think. I'd love to get that into a PSA slab at some points, especially because that grade is nothing special. Okay, now let's go on. The grade is a BGS 8.5. And now let's go on to the next one, 2020. The 2020 Prizm Black Finite Christian McCaffrey. Again, this was a collector-to-collector deal as well, showing this one to the camera. They're all beautiful cards, but this is probably my least favorite of the four that I've shown so far in terms of design. Again, this was a collector who reached out directly to me, and he picked up the card, I think, off of eBay, maybe like binned it or something. And I think he sort of saw what I was working on. He saw my bounty for the rookie, and he was just like, "Hey, man, I'd love to sell you this at a really fair price," and he did. So the price I paid for that was $1,200 as well. So did okay in that one too. Didn't grade well at all. It got a BGS 8, 395 subs, and then a Centurion of 7.5. So again, eventually I'll get that into a PSA slab. I'd love to get them all into a PSA slab eventually. But yeah, this I have in my notes. This was graded in October of 2021. Same for the other one too. So I think maybe I used like my Industry Summit voucher. I don't remember exactly, or maybe it was at a Dallas card show or something. I don't remember exactly how that worked. I'm pretty sure I used if one of those years when we went to the Industry Summit, the gift bag included free grading vouchers to Beckett. And so I think I may have used 2 of those vouchers to grade those 2 cards, and I was a bit disappointed by the grades. The grades don't really matter, but I think they maybe got a harsh treatment. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next one is the 2021 Prizm Black Finite of Christian McCaffrey. And this one is going to be his final one in a Panthers uniform. And in this one, he has the Carolina blue jersey on. And so the story behind the pickup here is I purchased this raw for $1,200 again. Nice little streak of $1,200 buys there. This one was in June of 2022. And I remember it was on Instagram. I almost want to say it got pulled in a break, if I remember correctly. And the guy who pulled it, I saw the break, and then the breaker or maybe somebody else was in the break, or somebody sort of helped guide me to the person who pulled it, and I reached out to him, and then we were able to agree on a deal at $1,200. I think the reason why it was $1,200 was because I was like, look, I mean, I picked up his 3rd and his 4th years for $1,200. So would you be willing to take this? And I purchased it raw. I graded it at the 2022 National in Atlantic City. I think that grade reveal is on camera somewhere, maybe in one of my brother's documentary videos about the National. And it got a PSA 9, which is great. I'm really happy to get that grade. And I just wish I had graded them all PSA from the start, but just for the uniformity of it all. But anyway, got the PSA 9. The centering, I think, is certainly holding it back a bit from reaching gem. But I always love grading cards on site at shows too. It's always fun. So that's the fifth there, McCaffrey finite. Let's go on to the 2022, his first in a 49ers uniform. And this one, so by this point, I guess, if I'm paying attention to the dates correctly, it looks like I had accumulated all four prior to getting the rookie. Yeah, so I had all four. So I got the rookie year one in September of 2022, and I had accumulated the other four, the 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. I had accumulated all those before getting the rookie. So I was 4/5 of the way there. And then that rookie made it 5 out of 5. And I think that really put the pressure on to keep the run going. And so if you remember, during this time, product releases were delayed. And so the 2022, here it is. I enjoy this design. I don't think it's not one of my three favorite, but it's not my least favorite either. And it has a really nice it has a really nice glow to it, maybe just because of the background used on the photo or something. But the story there is I purchased this one for $2,050 from somebody who pulled it, who went into their card shop. Their shop in, I think it was in upstate New York, if I remember right. And they went in, they bought a hobby box, they took it out to their car, they opened it, and they hit that card, and they posted it to a Facebook group. And I wasn't in that Facebook group, but somebody who wasn't in the Facebook group sent me a DM and notified me. And so I went in, I got access to the Facebook group, and I saw some people were making lowball offers. I think somebody offered like $50 for it. Somebody offered a more generous $300, and I just messaged the person directly. And I said, $2,000. How's that sound? And they really couldn't believe it. They thought they were like, really? This card is worth that much? And there's always a risk there that if you come with a really strong offer, then they might think to themselves, well, is it worth even more? And the imagination starts running wild. But they, and to be clear, especially that time, it was not worth more. That was a strong offer, and they accepted it. And so the card was raw. Obviously, the deal went very smoothly. And then so that deal happened in March of 2023, which is pretty shortly after product release. And then I took the card to the Mint Collective, the second and final Mint Collective in Las Vegas again, and graded it on site with PSA. And there you can see the grade. It got a PSA 8. I think a fair grade for the card. It has a slight refractor line running horizontal, and the centering isn't anything to write home about. But especially the red trim of the label looks nice with the red 49ers uniform and the accent color of red used in the car's design. So that's 6, right? Yeah, that's 6 finites. And I think at that time the run was complete and active, and I wasn't missing any. But as each year the new product comes out, and then all of a sudden I'm missing one. And so I've been in the throes, I suppose, of trying to keep this run united. Suddenly I'm reminded of one of the definitions of collecting, which is bringing together like items. And that is certainly this form of collecting, is bringing together these very similar items. Okay, so then now the pressure is really on to keep this run alive. The self-imposed pressure, by the way, I sort of have alluded to several times, I'm very ambitious as a collector. I love the pressure, by the way, even though I will complain about it too. It's fun. It's exciting. It's a challenge. It heightens the reward if you actually do happen to keep or to meet your collecting goals. And so anyway, let's move on here to the 2023, his second year in a 49ers uniform. I happen to really like this one, just the way it looks. And again, when I remark on the way it looks, I'm talking about the McCaffrey in particular, not necessarily the full set or for all the other players or anything, but for McCaffrey, maybe it's the photo they use or just a certain way that the finite pattern interacts with the card's geometric design elements and the photo, or just, I don't know, but I really like the way that one looks. And this one, the story here This was pulled in a break by a card shop in Milwaukee. And somebody on Instagram happened to alert me to that. And just with a tag, with just a little, there was like a hit recap post, and they just, in the comment section, they just tagged me. And then I was fortunate to see the tag, because sometimes Instagram doesn't show me all the tags and stuff. But I saw it, and I went over and I said, "This is amazing. Thank you." I contacted the breaker. I had to get in touch with them through Facebook because they were non-responsive to my Instagram inquiries, and they directly put me in touch with the buyer. And I at this point, I can't play games. At this point, I really, really can't play games. I need to secure these cards. And so my strategy, and this strategy is susceptible to critique, obviously. I mean, it may be a good strategy, it may not be, but it's my gambit, so to speak. I come in with an outlandish offer. I come in with an offer that hopefully is too good to refuse, that it's too good to play around with, and I'm fully transparent, because a lot of these cards get scooped up by dealers and flippers. I think people end up feeling bad when that happens. If a dealer or flipper comes in and scoops it up, and then they're reselling it on eBay and they make a profit, and the person just thinks to himself, like, well, why couldn't I have done this? I shouldn't have sold it. And then it creates this mentality that, like, I shouldn't sell the good cards that I pull because somebody else is going to buy it and just sell it for more because they have a better network than me, or they're whatever. So I really, I try to come in and make an offer that's very strong, stronger certainly than anybody who's trying to profit or flip it. And then I also let them know, look, I'm a McCaffrey collector. I have the Black Finite run, except for your card, and it won't be resold or flipped. It's going into my collection. And so so I hope that the combination of an appeal to helping a fellow collector and a price that's too good to refuse, that's way above market, the hope is that the combination of those two things leads to a deal. And so far it has. So that was the case here. The person was very happy to sell it to me. They're very gracious. And but anyway, the amount I offered was $5,000 for the card raw, which is just too high. I think the open market for that card at that time would have been probably around $2,000, $1,500, maybe $2,500. But that's, so I came in, two times or even more of the market value for the card, and fortunately got it. And so this got graded at the May 2024 Dallas Card Show. I believe the way that this worked was I dropped it off with PSA at the Dallas Card Show, because by this point in time they were setting up at the Dallas Card Show. I think I dropped it off with them, and then it got shipped back to me, because I don't believe they do on site at Dallas. But that was huge, and so that gave me 7. That gave me all 7 Black Finites, and now we come to today's mail day, or this week's mail day, or the thing that caused this show to come into existence, the 2024 Prizm Black Finite McCaffrey, which is still raw. And if you're wondering why I have it inside of a top loader, inside of a slab guard, it's because this stacks more nicely into my shoebox. But anyway, so this McCaffrey, I happen to think is maybe my favorite aesthetically. It just might be. It's still new, so that there might be a new factor. But this one and the 2019 and the 2023, I really, really like these. And so the story here is the 2024 Prizm came out months and months and months ago. I want to say maybe about 6 months ago. Panini's certainly gotten back onto a better release schedule, and I'm pretty sure that this Prizm came out towards the tail end of the season. And there was a lot of excitement about this particular Prizm football release, because it marked the introduction of the Nebula 1-of-1 parallel to football, to Prizm football. And so there was a lot of excitement around those, a lot of people chasing those, and the finites were commanding strong market prices too. But the nebula was almost dividing the demand, or even siphoning some away. But it was also bringing in new people too, and general market growth and everything. But I was really keeping hope alive that the finite could come out, and maybe, I don't know, I could, who knows? But I was just hoping that I wouldn't just get killed trying to find it. But more, I was eventually having to pay up for it, just because of all the momentum surrounding the football season. The Prizm release was finally in season again for the first time in years. But I was more so hoping that that it would appear, at least, that I wouldn't mind getting killed on the price so much, as long as it appears. And so eventually, after months and months, and just I kept contact with not just the collecting community and all my fellow Christian McCaffrey collectors, but also well-known dealers and flippers who have a lot of these cards, collectors who have a lot of these cards. I just would check in with everybody. Have you seen it? Have you seen it? And no, nobody's seen it. And then finally it happened last week. A fellow collector who's a 49ers collector, who also has, collects some McCaffrey. He said, yeah, here it is. Here it is. The card has appeared, and it was pulled in a break. You can see the image still has the breaker's seal on the top loader, and so that led to me reaching out to the breaker, but the breaker never even replied to me. Instead, my friend really aggressively pursued it on my behalf, and so he reached out to the breaker on my behalf and said, "Hey, who hit this? My buddy would really like to buy it." And so the breaker never even replied to me. He replied to him. And then my buddy gave me the contact information of the person who pulled it. I reached out, and then things got a little bit anxiety inducing, because I offered 5,000 again, which in today's market is about twice comps. Like Tyreek Hill's Black Finite sold for around 2,500. Tyreek Hill might be a little bit more expensive than McCaffrey, I don't know, but there were some other comps like in that 2,500 range for players who I think are probably comping pretty similar to McCaffrey. And so at least $5,000 is at least twice market, maybe more. And he said, well, the card's not in hand yet, and it's really up to my 9-year-old son if I'm going to sell it or not. And so I said, I understand, and it's a great card. And if you do choose to keep it, obviously I understand, because I want it quite badly. So I understand the appeal of the card. But I think they mulled it over and looked at some comps perhaps. And then they said, yeah, we'll do it. So they did it, shipped it to me overnight, and now it's here. And the run stays alive. That is 8 Prizm Black Finite 1/1s of Christian McCaffrey. I'm planning to grade it at the National this year, but grading is expensive, and I like to spend money on cards. But I hope to get it graded soon. And so that the run lives. The run lives on, and but there was half a year there where it wasn't complete, and you keep hope alive, and you also just have to accept, like, well, you start rationalizing, well, I still have the first 7, and that's still a run of its own, but nothing beats completion. And so the run is complete, and if I'm understanding how the license transfer and the release calendars are going to work, there will be one more season. There will be 2025 Prizm. There will be a 2025 NFL licensed Prizm football, and so there will be one more Black Finite McCaffrey, and then that should be it. That should end the NFL licensed run of Prizm football. Of course, there's always fanatics acquiring brands and IP, and there are other ways that Prizm football could come back, but it would be quite satisfying if it ended, from the point of view of keeping this run alive. So either that or I hope McCaffrey's career ends. and then I won't have to keep pursuing. I can say, well, I have the full run of playing years. Because I'm calling this a full run, and I do believe it is. But if we really wanted to get particular about it, McCaffrey does have a Prizm Draft, Black Finite 1/1s, from the Prizm Draft base sets during his career. But they show him in the Stanford uniform. McCaffrey also has inserts. He has Prizm Black Finite 1/1 inserts as well that show him in pro uniform. But they are not to the base set. So the more precise technical way to describe this run is it is McCaffrey's base set appearance in Prizm, the Black Finite 1/1 parallel in NFL licensed products. That is the full particular list, and any card that meets those criteria is one that is part of this run. So what I had next on my agenda after walking through that run is to look at the rest of the Christian McCaffrey collection. Because why not? We're talking about McCaffrey. There's usually not a lot of occasion to talk about collecting McCaffrey. I love all these cards. Let's talk about them just a little bit here. So the big dog in this group, and I think probably my biggest McCaffrey card, actually, not my favorite. I love the finites, but this card is probably the most valuable McCaffrey card. It is this one here, his rookie year 2017 National Treasures NFL Shield autograph, Platinum 1/1. This card, this particular year of this type of card is a well-known card because it's the Mahomes version of this is the most expensive football card of all time, sold privately for $4.3 million. I guess that was almost 4 years ago now, I want to say. So this particular card, obviously McCaffrey is pennies compared to Mahomes, but it's a neat card in no small part because of that. I won that card at auction for $35,000, right in the midst of McCaffrey's OPOY season. It was a well-timed sale by the seller, who I had been talking to for years, and I made some offers near $35K, but I never quite got there, and we could never meet on a price. But he'd sent it to auction at probably just the right time. I'm just kind of looking at how Card Ladder tracked the value of that card. And I guess McCaffrey's index kept going up because they went all the way to the Super Bowl that year. But today, the Card Ladder value says that card's worth about $25,000, following McCaffrey's index. So that would have the lowest confidence level among Card Ladder values because that sale is more than 6 months ago. So sales 6 months and older have the lowest confidence level. And I also wonder if McCaffrey's general index is really how much predictive power it has for a card like that. But certainly it's indisputable that McCaffrey's market, from the point of view of his index, of his highly transacted cards, the prices have come down since then. But I also I'm not worried about it. I absolutely love that card, and sort of bringing these two cards together, the Black Finite and the NT Shield autograph, the true. I should clarify. This is the base set NFL Shield autograph, because he has a few inserts in National Treasures that also have a Shield and autograph. Okay, let's talk about the others. What I'll do next is the two contenders 1/1s. So these, one is vertical and one is horizontal. From 2017 contenders. The vertical is the first appearing card from that base set. It's card number 311. The horizontal is the second appearing card from that base set. It's card number 351. And these are the Super Bowl ticket 1/1 for McCaffrey. Again, comparing to Mahomes, I believe Mahomes' Super Bowl ticket sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 300, 400,000, something like that. So it's a very, very big card for a player like Mahomes, and I tend to think it is for McCaffrey too. Sort of I picked up both in a single eBay auction. So whoever had them, you can see that the PSA certs are sequential. They follow one after the other, implying that they were graded together at the same time. And I purchased this in a lot. Somebody in December of 2021 sent to auction both of these cards together as a lot. And so I got both of them. And I like having both, but I'm not. If ever I were to let go of a McCaffrey card, I would probably let go of the horizontal. But why not keep them together when they're together, right? I mean, they make a nice pair. And then sort of the theory of my McCaffrey collection is sort of these three cards: the NT base set, Shield autograph, Platinum 1 of 1, the Prizm base set, Black Finite 1 of 1, and the Contenders first appearing base set autograph Super Bowl ticket 1 of 1. The theory is that there is my favorite non-autograph, non-memorabilia 1 of 1, which would be the Finite. My favorite autograph 1 of 1, which would be the Contenders. And my favorite memorabilia autograph 1 of 1, which would be the NT. So that's kind of the idea there. And I'm pretty content with the state of the McCaffrey collection with that sort of three-headed Mount Rushmore of cards. But there are still two more in the collection that I'd like to show, which is I recently took an interest in collecting the full select run for a player, because I feel like it's an underrated collecting achievement to be able to, like, during this era, for most players, they have at least 2 and usually 3 appearances in a select base set. Typically, for football, I think from 2014 through 2019, it was a 3-tiered base set, taking concourse, premier level, and field level. And so uniting the black 1 of 1 of each would be really difficult. It's like finding 3 different base set 1 of 1s. And so I have 2 of the 3 for McCaffrey. I've got the concourse black 1 of 1 in the grade of PSA 10, which is really neat. Really interesting story here. So a friend approached me at the Cleveland National and said, "Hey, I've found a guy who has a McCaffrey card you might be interested in," and it was this one, and it was raw. It was still in the same case that the breaker had sealed it in years ago, and the guy bought it from a break, and he just kept it sealed, and he kept it for years, and he just brought it with him to the National just in case, and sure enough, my friend connected us, and so I rushed over, got it graded on site. So that's one of McCaffrey's 3 select blacks from 2017. Here is a second. This is McCaffrey's premier level 2017 select black 1 of 1, which is die cut. I am a huge fan of the select premier level die cut from the era of select during which the premier level was the only die cut. Nowadays they have like die cuts of all different levels and stuff, and it's a lot. Maybe I'll take an interest in that and sort it all out one day. But for this era of select, which runs again from about 2014 to 2019, the premier level die cut black 1 of 1, that might be my favorite parallel of the entire Panini era. I love the way they look. And they just, whenever I'm scrolling an auction or something and I see one, it always stops me in my tracks and catches my eye. The acquisition story behind that one was there was a collector on Instagram who had it and another McCaffrey that I'll talk about in a second, which is the select XRC black 1 of 1 from 2016. Selling that card is one of my biggest McCaffrey regrets, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I purchased both from him in a package deal, and I paid really strong for both of them. The package deal, I think I sort of broke up the package deal such that this card I paid $5,500 for. And that's, the card is not worth that. The card's worth maybe $2,000 today, maybe. So that was a strong pay. And I don't know if I mentioned, so I ended up paying $3,500 for the Concourse Raw, which is a pretty strong pay too. And the cost of those contenders was a combined $7,000, I think it looks like, roughly, in that eBay purchase. So and those probably don't add up to $7,000 today, but okay. And then so that wraps up the state of the McCaffrey collection. And I would love to find the field level to bring together all three of McCaffrey's rookie year blacks. I know the field level is out there. It's in a BGS 9.5 holder, or at least it once was. It is in the pop report, and there is a picture of it. But every time I've tried to track that card down, and I mean, I've found appearances of it on Facebook. In fact, I even once encountered a scammer who didn't own the card who was trying to sell it, who had a picture of it. So the card is out there, but I've never been able to find it. But if this video has shown anything, it's that if you own that card, I will pay very competitively to get it. Now, the next thing I wanted to do to wrap up the McCaffrey talk is go over former McCaffrey cards from my collection that I no longer have. And so I've got these all tracked in Card Ladder, my Card Ladder collection. And you can see some really, really cool ones are here. It's like his 2017 Optic Gold Vinyl 1/1 and a PSA 10. And then the card I was referring to just a second ago, his 2016 Select XRC Prizm Black. They have a rookie card logo on it, and it's sort of colloquially referred to as the XRC, but I do dispute that because this card belongs to an insert set. And it also belongs to a season that predates his rookie season. So from a cataloging point of view, the season makes it not an extended rookie card, which is what XRC generally means, but instead it makes it a pre-rookie card, a PRC. I don't really hear many people using that turn of phrase. And then there's a question about to what extent it truly is a rookie card. I mean, it's a pre-rookie card, but is it even that? Because it belongs to an insert set. So maybe it's just a pre-rookie year card, but let's not get bogged down to that technicality right now. The fact of the matter is I deeply regret moving it. And I would love to be able to get it back one day, but maybe I'll, but only if I get the field level too. If I get the field level, then I have all three from 2017, then I would really get aggressive about trying to get this one back, just to keep all those together. The reason I sold it was because that McCaffrey NT Shield autograph Platinum 1/1 came up for auction, and I needed to fundraise to pay for it. Basically, I didn't want to have too many McCaffrey cards. I mean, you can see here I have 82 sales recorded of McCaffrey cards here, and there are some really neat ones. So I also had, as a stand-in until I got the 2017, I had a 2018 Panini Honors Recollection Collection McCaffrey on-card autograph, hand-numbered 1/1. It's a duplicate card of his Prizm Black minus the 1/1 stamp. And these create a lot of market confusion, frankly, but still pretty cool. And although I would prefer that they didn't exist, probably. But nonetheless, it was fun to own that for a little while. All the McCaffrey cards here that I sold, or nearly all of them, were towards the purpose of fundraising to pay for that shield. So I also had McCaffrey's 2020 Kaboom Green 1/1, which was McCaffrey's first green 1/1 from Kaboom in a Panthers uniform. I saw that card come to market to eBay again not that long ago, but I didn't. Like the theory behind my McCaffrey collection is that I really have continued to tighten it up rather than expand it. And And that card, while being a very cool card, it was just a little bit outside of the purview of how tightly knit I want to the McCaffrey collection based on the cards that I like. The Optic Gold Vinyl, similar. I love Optic, and I love Optic Gold Vinyl, but it was just sort of outside the purview. And to be honest with you, even the contenders and the selects are really, they're really on the edge. They're really on the edge of the purview of the McCaffrey collection. There could be a day when all the McCaffrey collection is the Black Finite run and the NT Shield autograph. That could come. And so, I at various points I owned 4 Prizm Gold McCaffreys. Most of them I was able to place with McCaffrey collectors, and I don't think I've seen any of them resurface. This is I once had his 2017 field level pink 1/1, which was a card I think distributed at maybe the Industry Summit or something like that. Some sort of promotional card. Pretty sure it didn't come from the 2017 select packs. I had a PSA 10 NTRP at a 99. Had his first select black in a 49ers uniform. Select field level PSA 10. This is another card that I regret moving. His 2017 Vertex Onyx 1/1 Capstones patch autograph, because now I have the Mahomes of this. So it would have been really cool to keep that pair together. Select XRC Gold. I had the complete run of the rainbow, or whatever you want to call it, of his 3 1/1s from the first year of Mosaic Football: the Nebula, the Black, and the Black Disco. Just some very cool McCaffrey cards here. The 2017 Donruss Elite Gold 1/1, which is a 1/1. I certainly sometimes get up the appetite to be like, man, I should go get all of McCaffrey's first appearing base at 1/1s from his rookie season, but I refrain, because I've already got more McCaffrey cards and more value tied up in McCaffrey cards than is reasonable given my budget constraints. But you just kind of see I just was kind of on a free for all, gathering up mostly McCaffrey 1/1s. But that was really fun. I appreciate you indulging that McCaffrey collection walkthrough. And some of the regrets, maybe there's something to learn there. If there is, I don't know what the lesson is, other than it sucks having to sell cards from time to time. But we can't have them all. And in fact, the fact that we can't have them all is one of the things that makes having some of them mean a whole lot more. Because if you could simply snap your fingers and acquire every card that ever existed, and you could finance it and you could find them, and it was really just that easy, then it wouldn't be nearly as meaningful, I don't think, to have those cards. So the fact that they are difficult to have, and the fact that we have to make difficult choices, and the fact that these are difficult to find, and that sometimes we never find certain ones, it lends an air of importance or significance or something. I'm sort of dancing around this idea that basically boils down to, rarity matters. Rarity makes things matter. And having to make trade-offs makes things a little more meaningful, at least to me. So let's transition now to the next part of this podcast. And this is why this screen I have preserved, which if you cheated while I was talking and sort of looked at what the screen said before I explained what it said, you were probably like, this is some philosophical mumbo jumbo. What the heck does this mean? Well, so let me say a little bit about this, because I'm going to connect this philosophical mumbo jumbo to a discussion about the current state of NBA total MVPs. So here's the quote. This is from episode 231 of Philosophize This, hosted by Stephen West, who he investigates various philosophical texts and sort of recaps them and presents them in his own way. And I enjoy that podcast. And I was listening to it today, actually, as I was running some errands. And this sort of occurred to me, that a connection occurred to me. So here's 2 paragraphs from that podcast, where the host, Stephen West, says, there's so many disputes out there. And by the way, the subject of this podcast was discussing Wittgenstein's later philosophical works, in particular his famous work. I believe it's called the Philosophical Inquiries or Philosophical Investigations, and it discusses his idea of language games. And anyway, here's what the host said. There's so many disputes out there that seem like they are huge issues that people have been arguing about for years between themselves, where when they get out of abstract theorizing about the words and instead they start focusing on the concrete uses of the words that they are arguing about, sometimes problems that seem really big can just completely dissolve with that move. As Wittgenstein says, if misunderstandings result from the ambiguities of our language, then philosophical problems arise when, quote, language goes on holiday, end quote. All right. So that's the idea here. And so Wittgenstein was, at least the way that the author was conveying what Wittgenstein was saying, or the author of this podcast, the way the speaker, whatever, the host, he was trying to convey this idea that Wittgenstein wasn't seeking to solve debates by having people each issue their definition of a word, which is the host of this podcast sort of observes that a lot of internet discourse today just seems to sort of be playing gotcha, where define this word and then, oh well, this is what it means. Oh well, if this definition has all these flaws, this and this. And he was saying that this is rhetorical, and that Wittgenstein has already sort of brought to the table the fact that yes, people having different definitions of different words is the source of a lot of disagreement, and that if we ever were to sort of step back and reveal not just the different definitions of words that we all have, but also the different rules and systems of grammar that give rise to those definitions and that permit those words to operate to make certain points, that the more that we strip bare those rules and reveal them and sort of reveal what different words mean to different people and what contexts gave rise to those meanings of those words, the more we do that, the more we dissolve confusion. So that's the idea here, dissolving confusion by stepping back from the debate arena and starting from a point of let's figure out what are the grammar rules, what are the language games that each different person is participating in. And the idea there being that, as the host of the podcast says, if we start focusing on the concrete uses of words, in other words, if we really figure out what a word means when each of us are using it, then sometimes problems that seem really big or irreconcilable, they just completely go away, because it turns out that we're using words in different ways with different meanings and within different systems of grammar rules. So that's very abstract, and I'm going to make it now I'm going to make it concrete, just like the host says. Let's make it concrete. So this relates to discussions about ranking the all-time status of NBA players, and in particular about GOAT debates, the greatest of all-time debates, or who is the best player debates. And the words that are at the heart of the disagreements, the words that if we sort of figured out what each of us meant by these words, we could very well dissolve confusion. Those words would be best and greatest. What does somebody mean when they say this person is the best? Do they mean that they're the most aesthetically pleasing player to watch? Do they mean that they score the most points? Do they mean that they have the largest impact on point differential when they're on the floor? Do they mean some combination of those three? With various weights attached to each of those qualities? What is it that each person means when they say the greatest or the best. And so Wittgenstein would say if we can really figure out what each of us mean when we say each of those words, and figure out why we think that each of those words means those things, which requires an investigation into each of our pasts and our all the context that we've grown up in and learned how to use words in, and the different communities that we come from. But if we can do that, we can dissolve confusion. And to be clear, dissolving confusion is not solving debate. Dissolving confusion is gaining mutual understanding, but it isn't saying, well, once we strip bare what each of these words mean, Wittgenstein isn't saying that then we'll figure out who's right. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that it's something. This is a very subtle point that everybody will understand better what the other is saying, but that doesn't mean that now one will emerge as right and the other will emerge as wrong. But I might be willing to go a step further. I might be willing to say, actually, though, when we do lay this bare, and it turns out that a group of people who say so-and-so is the best player, it turns out that they're really basing it on the fact that, it reminds them the most of their video game character that they created in NBA 2K. And that character scored 80 points a game. And so, that just in their mind, that's the video game caricature. This is the ultimate player that I created, and this guy reminds me most of that. So I really like that. If that's somebody's idea of greatest, or as someone aesthetic, like this is the most beautiful player to watch play. I love their crossover. They're the greatest. And then somebody else is coming with a concept of greatest that says, well, hypothetically, nobody's done this, but they said, well, I've actually calculated which player has created the biggest point differential when they're on the floor of any player in NBA history, controlling for the quality of teammates using regularization as a ridge regularization as a model, as a modeling technique, which people have tried to do, but we don't have on-court plus-minus data prior to 1996-97, but people continue to try to answer that question. But anyway, let's say somebody really did answer it, and they really did perfectly control for teammates, and then they said, this guy is 10 points per 100 possessions better than anybody else to ever play. So the clear and unambiguous impact winner, I can tell you, at least from where I'm sitting, I'm going to be much more moved by the person who says the higher impact player is the greatest. Then I'm going to be moved by the person who says this guy reminds me of what I like to see in a player. This passes my eye test. That's probably not true for everybody, but it's a very different thing. Like once we've laid bare sort of what each person means by greatest, or what each person means by best, it becomes a different conversation, or at least for me as an observer, becomes different. Like if you just have one guy saying, well, X is the best, he's the greatest, and the other guy saying, well, Y is the greatest, there's really no way to evaluate those claims yet. But once we start figuring out what each one means when they say greatest or best, and then there's become such a stark difference. One guy saying X is the best because he has the most aesthetically pleasing style. The other guy saying Y is the best because of this indisputable impact measurement that puts him leagues ahead of every other player to ever play. I'm going with the guy who says Y. But of course, that's the byproduct of my own language games that are happening even underneath the initial comparison of just what is best or greatest mean. There's a language games all the way down, and all the words and the grammar rules and so forth. But anyway, that's how I'm tying this Wittgensteinian idea into the greatest or best player of all time debates, and also sort of before I listened to this podcast today, I still was sort of having this intuitive idea that that the metric that I've devised, that I like to look at when I rank players, I've always tried to remember to frame it in the following fashion. I'm certainly not trying to say who's best or who's greatest. What I'm trying to do is exactly what my metric says I'm trying to do. And that metric, for most of you are probably familiar, is total MVPs. So I have a metric that I think relates is understandable and allows me to interface and dialogue with a fan of the sport who has any level of expertise, from the most casual observer to the most expert analyst. Total MVPs is a language that we can all speak. Total MVPs simply being how many finals MVPs plus how many regular season MVPs, and then just put them all on a list. And so I try to make it clear, this metric is not saying who is the best, and this metric is not saying who is the greatest. I'm not even endeavoring to define those words, and I almost want to push people away from using those words. Instead, let's just talk about what we're measuring. Can we just start there? Can the conversation get off the ground by us having a mutual understanding in the first instance of what we each mean and what we each are discussing? And so I'm saying, I'm not saying that total MVPs means somebody's the best or the greatest. All I'm saying is that total MVPs means how many total MVPs does each person have? And it occurred to me after listening to this podcast that that's sort of a byproduct of Wittgenstein's impact on philosophical and just general inquiry into topics and his impact on language. At some points, it probably made its way down to me, and it sort of resulted in, or helped me sort of come to this understanding that that I just want to describe what I'm measuring and not attach any additional purpose or meaning on top of it. And so, all right, that was fun. Now let's actually get to the. As I grab a swig of water here, I've been talking for over an hour. Let's get to the point now. And the point is, where does the total MVPs ranking stand on the heels of the 2024-25 season concluding? And we have a new entrant into the top 18, and that is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Really, I should say the top 25. Here's why. Gilgeous, I have him ranked now at 18th on the total MVPs list because he has 2. So in that sense, he's in the top 18. But he's really in a 7-way tie. Let me make sure I have that right. He's really in an 8-way tie. He is in an 8-way tie for 18th with all the players who have 2 total MVPs. And the reason why I give him the tiebreaker is because my tiebreaker is simply whoever added their most recent MVP most recently, or whoever added their last MVP most recently, they win the tie, under the presumption that competition in the league continues to modestly increase over time, which might be a faulty assumption. So that's why I don't really love that tiebreaker. I don't really love it. A tiebreaker really isn't needed, but things do have to go into a list in my spreadsheet as we're looking at here. So here are all the players who have 2 total MVPs, and they are sorted. So maybe it's less of a tiebreaker, more of a sorting mechanism. Sort of like alphabetical might be a sorting mechanism. But here they're sorted by whoever accomplished their last MVP most recently. So you have Gilgeous, who has 2. Kawhi Leonard, 2. Dirk Nowitzki, 2. Obviously, these guys all have 2. Steve Nash, Karl Malone, Bill Walton, Wes Unseld, and Bob Pettit. That's your group of players who have 2. And so coming into this season, there were only 24 players in NBA history who had 2 or more total MVPs. And now, after Gilgeous sweeps regular season and finals MVP, there are now 25. And it was significant for Gilgeous to get 2 MVPs rather than 1. because if you're in the one MVP club, there are 28 members in the one MVP club, and there are some great players in there who have, like Kevin Garnett has one total MVP. The statistical analysis suggests he's in a different tier than a lot of his colleagues in the one MVP group. David Robinson has one total MVP. That's another guy who statistically probably ranks a bit higher. Jerry West has one total MVP. Oscar Robertson has one total MVP. But then on the flip side, Derrick Rose has one MVP. Jaylen Brown has an MVP. Chauncey Billups has an MVP. So the one MVP crowd, that you're really swimming in a different level of depth when you graduate from 1 to 2, and that's what Gil just did within the span of about 2 months. He went from regular season only to regular season and finals, which put him into this top 25 group in terms of total MVPs. That's his fairy tale. That's his storybook of a season as a player could enjoy. And then to recap the list while we have it here, above Gilgeous, you have 6 players who effectively are tied for 12th, each with 3 total MVPs. Stephen Curry, Giannis, Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Willis Reed. Step above them, you have 3 players effectively tied for 9th who have 4 total MVPs. Nikola Jokic, Shaquille O'Neal, and Moses Malone. Above them, you have a 4-way tie for 5th of 4 players with 5 total MVPs. They are Tim Duncan, Larry Bird, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. Above them, by himself with 6 total MVPs, is Magic Johnson. He's in 4th. In a 2-way tie for 2nd with 8 total MVPs, LeBron James and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then sitting alone in 1st is Michael Jordan with 11 total MVPs. Final segment for today's show. Total MVPs. What does that mean? So Cajun invited me to be part of a multi-video series. I think we recorded maybe 5 or 6 videos, and he put them to the Cajun Cardboard YouTube channel over the last month or two. And we eventually, we effectively compared lots of top 10-ish players first head-to-head, and then we produced lists, top 10 all-time greatest players. And even though previously I said that I'm not attempting to tell or to indicate who the greatest players are, I'm simply indicating who has the most total MVPs for the purpose of this exercise, which was made more for its entertainment value than its truth value, at least from where I'm sitting, because I honestly don't know who the greatest players are. I don't know what the right methodology is to determine that. I don't know if I ever could know. I certainly am convinced of the idea that the most valuable or the best, I don't know, using these words suddenly get very slippery, but I'm certainly of the point of view that perhaps the measure of a basketball player's ability is how much do they contribute to the point differential while they're on the floor, which is something that's very difficult to measure. But essentially the point of basketball is to score more points than the other team. And the more that you score more points than the other team, the better you are at the purpose of basketball. There are some flaws there because, you can run up the score in garbage time, and so you can end up biasing the statistics in favor of players who run up the score in garbage time, who stay in to collect extra stats, or stat padding. So you would also then want to adjust for garbage time. Although, ideally, most players are going to play roughly the same amount of garbage time over a long enough sample. Maybe. I don't know. But probably some adjustment for garbage time is a good idea. But anyway, the idea there is sort of that in non-garbage time, the player who contributes the most to the largest point differential in their team's favor while they're on the floor, to me, that would seem to be the best basketball player. Now, that player might not have an aesthetically pleasing style. Hypothetically, that player might not score any points. That player might not get any assists. What if the player was just 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide and simply was able to set screens that nobody could get around? And so this player's impact leads to their team scoring 2 points per possession on every possession because they simply stand there and screen everybody, and their teammate gets a dunk every time. And then on the defensive end, they just sit in the paint, and nobody has a prayer of scoring over them. That's a very extreme example of how a player could have no skills at all and not score any points and not assist, but their impact on point differential could be larger than anybody else's. And then my system would obligate me to say that that person is the best at basketball. So there I sort of came up with an absurd example to show how exactly impact works as a measurement, and B, an extreme or silly example of how, like, well, how can you say this guy's the best basketball player? Isn't it so much nicer to watch Allen Iverson perform a crossover or whatever? But there's validity to that, right? This goes back sort of to the idea of what do you mean by best or greatest? But I would not have many qualms about acknowledging that guy's the best player. And I think the proof would be in the pudding there, because suppose you could have a situation where you have a draft of like every player in the history of the NBA at their very best, at their prime, is thrown into a pool, and we're starting up a new league, and you have a draft, and every team can pick any player from history. Even though history would have Michael Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain and LeBron James and all these amazing players, that guy, the 10-foot by 10-foot man, he's getting drafted first, because he leads to 2 points every time on one end, and he leads to 0 points every time on the other end. So that guy's getting drafted first. And but that's just a different way of sort of getting at what best or greatest means. And that was quite the sidebar there, en route to me getting to the idea of total MVPs. So we're going to wrap up with this idea of total MVPs. We were doing this exercise with Cajun, and I came up with my list, like I was discussing, and my list was just total MVPs. I said, look, I don't really know who the best is, and there isn't really a perfect impact metric out there. And the one that I think is the best, which is box plus minus, it only goes back to 1973-74. So it's excluding significant seasons of all-time great players like Wilt and Kareem and so forth. Some Kareem seasons, many Wilt seasons, many Bill Russell seasons, Bob Pettit, lots of guys. So I said, I'll just roll with total MVPs. And see if there's anything that persuades me to want to do otherwise. But I have lots of different ways that I evaluate players, and a project that I undertook a few years ago during the summer was the following. I went to Basketball Reference, and I retrieved the following information. I looked at every catch-all metric that Basketball Reference has. Catch-all meaning a metric that tries to capture all of a player's production or impact. And Basketball Reference has three that are rate-based, meaning they have three that give rise to other cumulative style catch-alls, but three that are measured on some per X basis, per minute basis, per possession basis. And that's a good equalizer, right? Because cumulative can end up indicating that a player who played 80 games scored higher on a metric than a player who played 50 games. But on a per minute basis, the player who played 50 may have been substantially ranking higher. than the player who played 80. So I just want to look at the per minute or the rate. I just want to look at the rate ones. And there are three. There are three rate-based catch-alls. The first one is box plus minus, which is an impact metric, and it's methodologically the most sophisticated of the three. There is win shares per 48 minutes, the second most sophisticated. And then there is player efficiency rating. And so win shares is sort of a hybrid between production, and it's really trying to measure impact, but it's measuring impact using let's just not get too much into methodology here, but you have win shares per 48, and then the third and final one is player efficiency rating, which is just pure production. It's just looking at everything in the box score, adjusting it based on how efficiently it's being done, how accurately it's being done, and then spitting out a number. And so they have these three, and they really in some sense skew towards different players, although I think it's quite meaningful when you get situations where one player is first in all of them, which we do have indications of that happening. And but so they have these three, and so what I did was I took each player's rank in each of those catch-alls, those rate-based catch-alls, during each season, and then I averaged the rank. This was inspired by Andy Bailey, who does similar average rank stuff on Twitter, which is really good. And I took the average rank, and then I saw who had the best average rank across all three season by season. And so anytime you have a player here, and you can look at this yourself if you want at thebestplayerontheplanet.com. It's funny, after all, they talk about best, but I used the word best in my title. But thebestplayerontheplanet.com, you can go look at that. And, and anytime you see a guy who has an average rank of 1, that means that they were first in all three. So Jokic has been first in all three 4 times. Giannis once, Harden once, Curry once, LeBron 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times was LeBron first in all of them. Kevin Garnett was first twice. On and on. You can kind of keep scrolling and see how many times somebody swept first. Obviously, David Robinson had multiple. Michael Jordan had multiple. And so I consider whether or not you were a sweep of all ones, but whoever has the best average rank across all three for a given season, I consider them the statistical MVP. All right. And so the statistical MVP list has, we'll just read the top few. Kareem has the most statistical MVPs with 11. Michael Jordan has 9. Wilt has 8. Jokic has 5. LeBron has 5. Shaq has 4. Larry Bird has 4. Neil Johnston has 4. David Robinson, Julius Erving, and Bob Pettit have 3. And then down the list goes. There are only 26 players in NBA history to win a statistical MVP. And those statistical MVPs go back to the 1951-52 season, with the caveat that BPM only begins in 1973-74. So for pre-73-74, it's simply averaging PER and win shares per 48. So if you add statistical MVPs into the total MVPs, so now we're giving a player a number that is the sum of 3 numbers. Their regular season MVPs, their finals MVPs, and their statistical MVPs. Now you get total MVPs, which, like I said, I debuted this on Cajun show because I felt like Cajun wanted or was able or willing or happy to engage on a statistical level. And by the way, I in case I didn't mention this, the statistical MVPs are only measuring the regular season. Measuring the playoffs is extremely challenging for a number of reasons. First of all, some players only play 4 games, some play 25. Everybody plays repeated samples of the same opponent, but most people play very different opponents, whereas the regular season, you play roughly all the teams roughly the same amount, with some difference based on what conference you're in. So anyway, it's just regular season only. But I think Cajun has a reverence for regular season achievements, particularly because of those reasons. And it just, I think he was really happy to engage on a level of statistical analysis and sort of look at advanced stuff. And he does that too in his own rankings of players and analysis of players. And I thought the audience because obviously Cajun is a very smart guy, and presumably he has a smart audience too, that they could handle total MVPs basically. So I trotted this metric out for the first time. I tabulated it and trotted it out for the first time because also because it was predictable. Like my top 10 list is going to be total MVPs. Like anybody can go look that up and predict it. So I kind of wanted to add a little layer of intrigue. What happens when we add in statistical MVPs too? And so when you do that, here's the results that you get. Michael Jordan is first with 20. Kareem is second with 19. And then LeBron and Wilt are tied for third with 13. Now, when I introduce this, so there's your top 4. And when I introduce this, it was sort of observed right away by Cajun that Kareem really stacked those statistical MVPs because the talent pool during the 70s was divided among the NBA and the ABA. And so Kareem really is each of those MVPs, those statistical MVPs, they're almost like half MVPs or like an MLB MVP, where it's just for half of the league. And then also, what about Dr. J? He was over there in the ABA. He was putting up incredible stats. It's been pointed out to me that the ABA might have had even a stronger talent pool than the NBA did during those seasons. But and maybe I'll try and find a way to bring ABA into this too. But for now, I'm just keeping this to NBA. And so and so then people who rightfully protest, like, what about the ABA? You're right. And I have to modify my statement, my observations to be clear that I'm only talking about NBA history, not including ABA history. And if we do want to start going down that path a little bit about what about the ABA, well, what about the Olympics? What about collegiate? There's I forget the guy's name now, but there's some Olympian basketball player from Brazil who I think has the most total points scored in Olympics history. There's lots of stuff that starts coming in when we go beyond the NBA. Now somebody could reply back and say, yeah, but the ABA is the closest. It was a competitor league. It was almost a co-equal league or something. And that's true, but I don't mean to invoke the slippery slope fallacy here, but where do we stop if we're going to look beyond the NBA? I can certainly see a stronger case for involving the ABA than collegiate. I think Olympics merit maybe some consideration. This may be stronger than collegiate, but anyway, I acknowledge that my scope is limited to the NBA only. But with that scope so limited, and with the caveats in place that talent pool was different, and to be clear, Kareem wasn't the only one facing a diluted talent pool. I think you can certainly make the argument that the talent pool became substantially enriched around the time that Giannis, Jokic, Embiid, Luka, and some of these other players, not just foreign players, because Gilgeous-Alexander is a foreign player, Steve Nash is a foreign player too, but players who come across oceans to get here. That the talent pool suddenly expanding from the several hundred million in the United States to several billion countries. That there are levels to the talent pool discussion beyond just NBA versus ABA, and that the talent pool adjustment is a meaningful critique, but it doesn't only apply to Kareem. But anyway, stepping out from the weeds and back and zooming back out a bit, that produces your your top 4 when statistical MVPs come in. And then fifth, there's a 2-way tie for fifth between Nikola Jokic and Larry Bird, who each have 9. And so this is where Jokic gets a huge boost because he's a guy with only 1 championship. He is a guy with 3 regular season MVPs and a finals MVP. But he is a guy who has 5 consecutive statistical MVPs. And so from that point of view, he's already one of the 5 greatest players ever. If you look at statistical MVPs, flipping back to statistical MVPs, Kareem with 11, Jordan with 9, Wilt with 8, Jokic with 5, and LeBron with 5, and nobody else with 5 or more. So that's where he is statistically right now, using the statistical MVP approach. If you don't use the statistical MVP approach, which sort of says, just tell me how many times somebody was the best and nothing else matters. If you look at like career averages, for example, he has the highest player efficiency rating of anybody. He's first in that. Granted, he hasn't had the twilight of his career. He has the highest box plus minus of anybody. Once again, with the caveat that he hasn't hit his twilight yet. And he has the highest win shares per 48. I'm pretty sure career. I'm pretty sure he's first in all those. Maybe not in win shares per 48. So, but there needs to, so one way to adjust for the career of it all is to step back and say, let's look at 5-year peaks instead, or 3-year peaks or whatever. And Andy Bailey put out an article that looked at 5-year peaks. And even if you just zoom into 5-year peaks, Jokic is pretty sure he's first in. He's certainly first in box plus minus. His 5-year box plus minus peak is first, and he actually suffers from a different bias there, because the first year of that 5-year peak was considerably weaker than where, like, once he has a season next year, that 5-year peak average is going to go up. So the total MVPs rewards Jokic quite a bit. It also rewards Kareem quite a bit. It rewards Wilt quite a bit. It punishes LeBron, and LeBron is a really interesting case study, because if we, for example, if we only use box plus minus to determine statistical MVP, rather than also mixing in win shares per 48 and player efficiency rating, and I'd be fine with that probably, a BPM only statistical MVP. If we did that, I believe LeBron has 8 or 9, it might be 9 seasons, 8 or 9 seasons where he was first in BPM. So that changes the analysis for LeBron quite a bit. Just depending upon if we only use BPM, which I think is the best one, rather than if we use win shares per 48 and player efficiency. So little tweaks can shift this stuff, and that's why none of this is gospel, right? This is more for fun. Okay, but then after Jokic and Bird, then you have Shaq at 8. Shaq is another guy who is very much rewarded by bringing in statistical MVPs, because he has 4 of those. So Shaq is a guy like Jokic who got denied several regular season MVPs when he was clearly the best player. And but unlike Jokic, Shaq was able to validate his personal greatness in the NBA Finals setting, where he had a 3-peat with Kobe, and Shaq swept the Finals MVP for all 3. Then you get to Magic Johnson, who has 6. So Magic had no statistical MVPs. He's a guy who really gets punished by this method. He had no statistical MVPs, and he had all regular season or Finals MVPs, 3 of each. Curry is a guy who gets a slight boost here, since he's got 2 statistical MVPs on top of his 3 Finals and regular season combined. Giannis is another guy with 5. Bob Pettit with 5. Bob benefits quite a bit. He has 2 regular season or Finals MVPs, and he has 3 statistical. Tim Duncan is a guy who suffers under this approach. He had 0 statistical MVPs. Same thing for Bill Russell. So there's your I guess there's your top 13, with Bill Russell, Duncan, Pettit, Giannis, and Curry all sort of tied for 9th with 5. And then below that you get to the guys with 4: Durant, Nowitzki, Dr. J, which is impressive for Dr. J because this is NBA only. David Robinson, Moses Malone, and Neil Johnson at 4, and then step down to Kobe and Hakeem. Those are 2 guys who get punished under the statistical MVP method because they had none. But all right, there we go. And then Gilgeous, I guess I'll use this to put a ball. So even Kawhi sort of steps ahead of Gilgeous once statistical MVPs are brought in with 3. Garnett gets the benefit of his 2 statistical MVPs to go along with his 1 regular season, so he steps up to 3. And then Gilgeous is pushed down to a tie, a 6-way tie for 26th among guys who have 2. So now it's Gilgeous with 2, Nash with 2, Karl Malone with 2, Bill Walton with 2, Wes Unseld with 2, James Harden with 2. Personally, I'm more comfortable with, given what I've seen so far with Gilgeous, given that he won Finals MVP when he wasn't the best statistical player in the Finals, at least not by net points. That was Pascal Siakam. He won regular season MVP when he wasn't the statistical MVP. Most likely, he wasn't first in box plus minus. He wasn't first in player efficiency. He wasn't first in net points. He was first in win shares per 48 by a narrow margin. And win shares per 48 highly rewards free throws, and especially accurate free throw shooting. If you shoot a high volume of free throws and you shoot them accurately, win shares per 48 loves you, which is fine, neither good nor bad. But that's a bias that stat carries. And so to me, I think this is the right company for Gilgeous. That's my gut instinct, is that terrific season, led the league in scoring, was very efficient, the most efficient player and the most impactful player behind Jokic, and sometimes even ahead of Jokic in a few of the stats. Harden-esque. I think he and Harden right now, both having 2, is accurate. I think this is the right grouping. Nash, Harden, Malone. This is the group that I have him in right now, which is an incredible group. This is a group that represents a position, a status in the top 31 players in total MVPs. And I'm more comfortable with him there right now. And then let's see what happens next season. Let's see if he can snag the statistical MVP. Let's see if he can lead the league in box plus minus. Let's see. Let's just see. Let's let things unfold and not prematurely crown here. I would feel much better about his status if he had a statistical MVP or 2, which is the same way I feel about Nash and Malone. Harden does have a statistical MVP, and he has a clear-cut one. So I start to have the inclination that, I like to see players have statistical MVPs too when they start getting into this top 30 range, and Gilgeous has certainly put himself into that company. So, all right, this has been a lot of fun. This is by far the longest HOJ-Cast ever. Ironic, considering I started it by saying I'm not going to do House of Jordan's length podcast, and I damn near did. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you for the next HOJ-Cast.